I disagree that these terms have reference that are universally agreed on to begin with. Postmodernism, I think anything in the philosophical domain, like there are people who regard the analytic versus continental distinction of philosophy as non-existent, right?
Mm.
And it's like, okay, well, language is about how useful the term is, right? Whether or not a term is a good term is how useful it is. That's really the only criteria I would put to it. And so there are people who say Foucault is not even a postmodernist, and it's like, okay, well, that fits well within the postmodernist narrative framework because words are all just power games anyway, essentially. But like the fundamental claim, you say postmodernists reject the Marxist framework. It's like, well, like a Foucauldian postmodernist would claim that power is the fundamental organizing principle of reality. I think that's fair to say. I think the term is power is that which acts upon actions, and so it conditions all relationships. This conversation would be a power game. The institutions in every government are predicated on power. Isn't that a meta narrative in and of itself? Doesn't that describe broadly reality itself?
Well, see, I'm not a Foucauldian scholar. I did study him, so I can only speak to the extent to which I understand. I think that Foucault would reject that characterization because I think that I mean, you can advance this as a criticism, right? That they're often vague on what they are claiming. What they'll do is they'll analyze something through a particular frame. But then if you ask them, well, like, does that, is everything just a power dynamic? I don't think they would actually claim that. They're typically, like, Foucault was interested in doing his genealogical historical analysis, right, of some particular concept or institution. So I don't think that he was really, and postmodern scholars are typically in the business of making claims like, everything is just power dynamics. But they do use that to analyze pretty much everything. So, but right. I mean, the question is, okay, let's suppose they are making that claim. I don't know that they would self-identify as claiming that.
I don't think
let's
that's
just say that they are.
So yeah, okay, yeah.
But so what follows from that? Like, it doesn't follow that therefore they're making the same claim as Marxists, because Marxists are making a very specific claim about the way that society is structured. The way the society is structured is based on the economic base, and that in turn is based on a clash between the interest of classes. Like, that's a very specific characterization that postmodernists don't typically hold to.
To me,
so how can you say that they're advocating the same thing just because they're both different power analysis of power? Like, liberals have an analysis of power as well. It's different, right? But that doesn't mean that they're Marxists just because they think that the power dynamics in society are also important. They have a particular idea about the relationship between the state and individuals within it, and the contractual theories of governance and so forth. That's a power analysis as well.
Sure. I think Marx said something to the effect of, like, all ideas, all of the dominant ruling class ideas, religion, traditions, everything is built upon dominant material relationships. That's his claim, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the dialectical materialism in a nutshell, right? It's all fundamentally material, dominant versus subordinate relationships. I don't interpret that, and maybe you give me your thoughts on it. How is that not essentially the claim of Foucault, or the idea that power is the organizing principle, right? It's like if all ideas, religion itself, everything is a result of dominant versus subordinate material relationships between not just people and classes, but like ideas themselves. Discourse is in and of itself a production of dominant versus subordinate material relationships. It's the same idea. To me, that's exactly what Foucault seems to be saying when it's power produces discourse, right? You produce the category, and then the category produces the discourse around it. It's like it's the same idea that power, and again, it's like, well, what is define power, and we get into the regression of the axioms.
Talking about that, right? But I don't really see how it's the same thing. So Marx is saying that essentially everything else in society, the superstructure, if I recall, which is like religion and political discourse and all that stuff, it's based on the economic base, which is the economic system, like whether that's feudalism or slave societies, feudalism, capitalism, and then ultimately socialism and into communism, right? That power dynamic determines everything else, according to Marx. That's why it's historical determinist, right? Because this idea, at least initially, was that every society progresses through these same stages, and everything at the superstructure is determined by the economic base, and the economic base is dominated by the clash of classes, like the serf and the lord in the feudal dynamic, or in capitalism, it's the capitalist and the worker, and the culmination of history will be the overthrow of the capitalists by the workers and the achievement of a classless society, right? Marx believed that was going to happen. It was inevitable. It's just that revolutionary activists could maybe accelerate it or help it along. And there was even dispute about that. But anyway, the point is that everything that I just said about that theory of society and the base and superstructure, postmodernists typically don't accept any of that, right? That is a particular Marxist analysis, dialectical materialism, which is the Marxist doctrine. They don't accept that. Yes, they do analyze society power structures, but again, Marxism, dialectical materialism, is a very specific analysis of power structures in society. Just because you analyze things through power structures doesn't mean that you accept a very specific theory of that, which is what dialectical materialism is.
But let's take the claim that that power produces discourse. That's Foucault says that, right? Power produces discourse, and the idea is whoever's in charge kind of gets to produce knowledge and disseminate their worldview as the objectively true worldview. So the church, because they had the power, which they had the power, they then got to say what was true or not. That that's very simplistically a simplistic kind of analysis of that. Marx said the exact same thing, which is, and you're correct, and the superstructure is built on the economic base. But he said specifically the ideas of the ruling class, everything, religion, all aesthetics, everything is fundamentally about who has the dominant material conditions. To me, that's exactly what Foucault is saying in that...
That's not what he's saying. Foucault talks about discourses and how power is structured and reproduced through discourses.
Right.
Marx didn't say anything about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Marx wasn't talking about that. He was talking about the way in which the superstructure is produced by the base and the clash of classes there. I don't see that in Foucault. That's not what Foucault thought.
Let me
just because they both thought that, for example, religion is about. I mean, who doesn't think that religious structures are about power dynamics? Like everyone agrees on that. There would just be a different analysis.
No, not at all. So
you're saying that. What it seems that you're doing to me is that you're looking at superficial similarities between them and then saying that, well, they're just the same thing. But they're not the same thing. Like, just in terms of, scholars in these disciplines have spent decades arguing between each other about their conceptions of power and things.
Sure.
So to say that they're the same thing just seems silly to me, that they're just not.
Well, I would say they're very similar, and for the reasons I gave. Let me.
Well, you can group them under critical theories. That's what I said before. There are certain family resemblances, is the term I would use, which is fine. But to make up a new term and then say that, well, they're basically all just part and parcel of the same thing, postmodern Neomarxism, I don't really see the point in that.
Okay, fair enough. So all right, so let me ask you this. So if Peterson, instead of saying the term postmodern Neo-Marxist, if he used the term critical theorist, just in a one-to-one replacement.
Critical theorists, yeah.
You'd be okay with that?
Or critical theory.
You wouldn't have an issue?
Broadly, I think so, yes. So there is one caveat that I would levy, which is that the list that he mentioned of people, I don't know all of those people. Many of them, I think it would be fine to call them as critical theorists or activists influenced by critical theory. Maybe there are some for whom that would not be appropriate, so I'd have to check. Because just because you're progressive doesn't mean you're...
I agree. Bernie Sanders is not a postmodern Neo-Marxist, I guarantee you that.
Yeah. So I don't want to speak for all of the times when Peterson has used that term. But what I would say is, in general, it seems that critical theory or critical theorists would be an appropriate replacement for many of the things that he's trying to say with the term postmodern Neo-Marxists.